In my younger days, like that was actually an important thing to me of like, I didn't like it that people could just be wrong.
How are these people just walking around just being wrong? It makes no sense.
Butterscotch
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 465 of Coffee with Butterscotch, the game dev comedy podcast of Butterscotch Shenanigans. I'm Seth and I'm the games programmer.
I'm Adam, I'm the miscellaneous programmer.
I'm Sam and I'm the artiste.
And this is a show where we talk about life, business, and working in the games industry. Today's April 26th, 22 by 4. Before we get started, we have a warning. There's going to be profanity in this show. We'd also like to thank our recurring supporters over at moneygrab.bscotch.net. Thank you so much for your monthly donations to help keep the podcast going. All right, we got a lot to talk about today, so let's get into it. First off, an announcement, some news. We've got a playable demo of Crashlands 2 coming down the pipe pretty soon.
When?
We've been talking about making it for a while now, but yeah. It's got a date.
So it'll be coming May 21st, which is a Tuesday. So pretty soon, I mean, I guess still in several weeks after this podcast episode airs.
It's very soon in adult time, though, It's like...
That's true.
It's basically tomorrow.
That's true. Once you get to your 30s like us, you blink and it's been 3 weeks,
Yeah.
And then you're 50. So
Yep.
So we've been working on this. We worked on this demo quite a lot over the past couple of months, really. I mean, it's not like exclusive demo work. It's more like continuing to refine the new player experience, doing lots of localization, which we've talked about on the podcast, refinement of controls, and just kind of like getting everything really, really nice and tight for that like early player experience. And so we put together the demo, and it's separate from, because we still got a long ways to go before the full game is out. We don't necessarily know what's going to change between now and launch in that early game. So rather than burn a bunch of dev time trying to do a lot of like backwards compatibility stuff, we just said the demo, like what you do in the demo is just for the demo. That's not gonna
separate thing.
That's not that's not gonna carry over to the, like your save won't carry over to the full game because that's still a ways off. But the demo lets you kind of play through a bunch of the early stuff. We figure for most players it'll be at least a couple of hours worth of stuff to do. We've seen people do like 2 to 5 hours, depending on how deep you want to go in some certain things.
Yeah, and it's also if you're trying to like play the whole thing, like get into every nook and
cranny. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, versus just like, I just want to know what I'm going to get into with the game when it comes out. So I just want to play and like see the kinds of stuff, So there's a lot of different kinds of experiences you could have. Because we also don't kick you out at any point. We just prevent you from getting into stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But
you got a bunch of invisible walls and like quests that, once you kind of get to like a good cliffhanger point, like a good stopping point in a storyline, then like that's kind of the end point of that storyline. But there's lots of different parallel ones. You'll be able to check out the gameplay, like craft a bunch of items, like check out some towns and meet a bunch of characters and all that.
And it will be just on Steam.
Just on Steam. Yeah. Windows on Steam.
Yes.
Yeah,
and Steam Deck.
Steam Deck.
It plays good on the Steam Deck. That's how I was doing my playtest, and I think it's probably my preferred way of playing it. Probably.
Yeah, I still prefer mouse and keyboard, but I do so little controller gaming that I'm just like not that good.
Yeah, I normally I would say I'm good. Like I play it on easy mode because also that's how I play games these days. But it just plays well with a controller. So although I did the last time I did a playtest.
Yeah, I was like, coming from Adam, that's pretty big because he was not happy with how it played with a controller.
Yeah, it was
like 6 months ago.
I felt really good about it. And I also really liked when I playing it on Android the last time I did, but that was like back in November. But it felt really good though. So there's nothing wrong with how it plays like on a PC. It's just being able to like sit down on the couch with a device. And it plays really well on the mobile devices. So I'm excited about getting it to that point where we can actually have people playing it on everything.
Yeah. So the other kind of challenge with the demo stuff was like, we had to get it wrapped up and we wanted to start like making sure the demo was good and then be able to keep developing, the rest of the game while the demo was there. So we did have to do a bunch of work on kind of like branch management and kind of separating things out. So, so the demo is kind of like locked in and we're now moving on and working on a bunch of other stuff. So, it'll be kind of weird because like by the time the demo comes out and people are playing it, that version of the game will already be kind of outdated. Yeah. Like, but actually like not much probably will have changed.
Because it's the beginning of the game. Stuff, that part's not going to change very much. So
we have the ability to make hot fixes and stuff to it. So it's not locked in.
Yeah. It's on a branch, but yeah. But we'd like to not do that so we can just keep moving forward, So, I guess what we're saying is if you find something wrong with the game, just don't say anything. No, but seriously, tell us, let us know what you think. We do have a Discord server, and we'll probably lots of people talking in there about it. And the demo will have a link to the Discord server off the main menu, so it'll be very easy to pop in there. So,
and we'll be. For the next few podcasts, we'll be reminding you that it's coming, and then when it's available, we'll tell you it's available. So we'll make sure that you know when it's ready to play.
And the demo will be live for at least like a month or so. So
yeah, that's actually probably just worth kind of talking about is that there's always this question of like the value of a demo, right? So we're doing the demo specifically because we can hand it off to streamers, so that's like a separate thing. But then, so we can participate in Steam-related events because over the past, 2 years or something, Steam has been really like pushing demos and events. Yeah. And you have to have one to be able to participate in certain of them. And so we still don't know outside of that if demos are otherwise a good idea, right?
We've never done one before.
We did do one for Levelhead that we had on itch, if you recall. It was on itch though.
Yeah, I don't know if that counts. Well, and also like Levelhead was in early access for a year, which is like a demo, but
it was a non-comparable scenario.
Levelhead was weird.
But if you go back like 5-10 years and you look at like games industry articles and stuff about like, should you do a demo? Should you not do a demo? The answer basically, like people had strong opinions about it, but if you actually look at like what they're using to back up their claims, the answer was really nobody knows if it's a good idea.
Can't quite tell. Yeah.
You can't tell because the only way you could know is if you could split the universe and do a demo in one and not the other. And of course you can't do that, right?
Well, and there's a lot of like sampling bias because people would be like, well, like games that don't have demos made a lot more money than games that did, right?
Or vice versa.
But like if you're making Call of Duty 7, you're not going to put up a fucking demo. Like the demo is the other 6 Call of Duty games that people have already played,
but
right?
Similarly, demos are really expensive to produce. And so if you have a demo, there's a good chance that you had a project already that was going to do well. Anyway, the point is it's all cloudy and it's uncertain. And the big question about risk is if I put my demo out, is there a possibility that I'm cannibalizing my future sales because somebody gets the demo, decides that's enough of an experience, or they don't like it when they otherwise would have bought the game and not refunded it, right?
I do think that if you look at the data that we've seen collected so far by like Chris Sikowski with How to Market a Game on the effect of these demos on Xfest and stuff, one of the things that does, at least in like how the market currently works on Steam, suggests that it's very good to have a very good demo, is basically that demos that have median playtime that's over 60 minutes, you can essentially correlate really nicely, essentially sales, right? Month one sales of a newly launched game with how well its demo is received by that median playtime metric. And it's a pretty tight thing where it's like games that are played for a long time as a demo sell a lot more copies than games that are played for a lot less time as a demo, right?
Yeah, but of course it also like since a demo reflects the game, then it could just be because the game is up there, right? So it's all to say these are things you can't actually have an answer to. Like you can't. It's not possible. So you just have to guess based on what you think makes sense. But I think the most important thing though is that because Steam requires a demo as a cost of entry into various events that dramatically boost your visibility on the store, then that's the thing that basically takes the question away, because it's like if you don't have a demo, you don't get to participate in that. In all likelihood, in our opinion, at least for a game like Crashlands, the visibility boost that we're going to get from having a demo so we can participate in those events and the boost our wish list and all that kind of stuff seems extremely likely to dramatically overcome any kind of like sales cannibalism downside that we could potentially have.
Well, and we still have no idea how long we'll have the demo up. Like it's possible that it just does really good work, and we're like, oh yeah, we'll just leave it there. So we just the demo just stays up forever, or we may say, well, we want to take the demo down, or before we launch the game. Yeah. And so that way,
I think we probably will, but I don't know because I think since the data is not shared with your main
the same portability
game,
thing means that
because to me, like, we need to pull it a significant time before launch so that people aren't playing the demo like right before the game comes out, and then they're like they've been playing for like 3 hours and they jump into the game and they're like, oh fuck.
Well, I think this kind of speaks to like the reason that we're doing that no save migration thing is because the game is still under heavy development, right?
Yeah.
And so
we don't want to worry about backwards compatibility with.
Yeah. So if we did keep the demo when the game actually launches, then we would have to, work to separately maintain the demo and keep and we would remove that restriction because there would be no reason for it.
We'd probably have to cut a new, if we wanted to have it at launch, we would need to cut basically a new demo that is compatible with.
And we'd have to maintain it the whole time.
I feel very safe as an expert in the PC game development field, just saying that you don't need to have a demo once your game is launched. You need a demo for pre-launch stuff. So I think that's the best bet and the safest bet for all this stuff.
And it's the least costly to not,
make the demo,
to not maintain two independent pieces of software.
Yeah, no thanks. Hard pass.
Yeah. So we're very excited about that. We've like the guys were saying, we've only barely dabbled in demos and how that works. And so we're excited to kind of see what shakes out. And also I think the last time we did this with Levelhead, we really didn't have a good handle on telemetry and kind of like being able to collect information about like how many people are playing and like how far they're getting or what they're interacting with. And so we've done some pretty cool stuff with Crashlands 2 for us being able to use stuff like this to get some statistics about kind of like how far people get, what quests people do or don't do, what items people like to use and stuff. So the demo is constrained enough that, we won't be able to use it to inform a lot about like overarching gameplay stuff, but it will give us a sense of like, are there spots in this early experience where people just kind of fall off, where they hit something that's confusing or frustrating or things like that. So we'll get lots of good information out of it too. All right. So again, May 21st, put it on your calendar. All right. Now let's talk about Fallout. Yeah. Specifically the show Fallout, based on the games by Bethesda. Well, kind of like
by
Bethesda, like it was Fallout 1 and 2 was not by Bethesda, right? It was by somebody.
I actually don't know. Was originals?
Because the first couple were basically like Fallout 3 was the one that really kind of actually like hit the mainstream.
It was the switch to 3D, right? That did that. Yeah. I mean, the first games are kind of they were popular at the time. They're old games, right? They were popular at the time, but in a pretty niche kind of a way. I think their popularity
the vibes are cool. In the show or in that universe, right? Where it's like the 1950s, but it's in the future. And there's like a lot of like, it feels like a Western. There's lots of cowboy kind of shit and like lots of gunslinging. It's got this Wild West frontier feel to it, but also there's lasers and like mech suits and giant mutants and
a lot of parody about the consequences of capitalism and about the U.S. government and governments in general.
Yeah. It's like, it's just such a rich ground for just telling like a billion different just like, and also in terms of the storytelling, it could go like really dark and sinister and gritty, or it can go like kind of goofy and humorous,
satire, and it does both.
It does both of those. Sometimes in the same game,
sometimes in the same sequence of story.
So been watching the show. I think I'm about halfway through the show. I'm enjoying it tremendously. But I think you guys both watched the whole thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
I'll
tell me,
spoilers.
What's your take?
I mean, it's an easy nail it for me, which is that they got the combination of like very gruesome shit happening.
Yeah.
There's that one perk that you can get, and I think in all the Fallouts, but definitely Fallout 3. that you can choose that causes your enemies to basically explode when you shoot them. And I'm pretty sure they leaned into that.
They did. Yeah.
Perk. Yeah.
Yeah. And they have like the junk jet, which is a fan favorite from Fallout 3, which is a jet you can make. It's basically like an inverted vacuum cleaner, but you just stuff it with random shit that you find. And you find a lot of random, like teddy bears.
It's a gun that shoots whatever just as ammunition.
And it makes an appearance in a very fantastic way at one point.
I couldn't believe they had that in their show. That was such a deep cut, but because I think because they introduced it in the show, shooting like a doll arm into a guy.
Yep.
Yeah. It's in the first episode.
Yeah, it's like right out of the gate.
But what I thought was great about it was, So I'm watching the show with my wife. So, we watched like a couple episodes last week and then a couple episodes this week. And so somebody put up a reaction video of like episode 1, who I had seen like some of their reactions to some other stuff. I was like, oh, this person's pretty entertaining. So I started watching it and she had no knowledge of the Fallout games or whatever. Right. Yeah. And so that scene came up where there's like this dude talking and then suddenly just bam, like a baby arm, like a doll arm is just like in his face and he's dead. Right. And then the camera cuts over and she's like, what? And then the camera cuts over to the dude holding the junk cannon thing. And she's like, what? And then the camera just moves on. Like the story just moves on. Like there's no, they don't make a big deal out of it. It's just a thing that happens. And like they do that kind of stuff in the show where if you know, you know. And if you don't, you're still very curious about like, what was that?
Yeah. So I think it is a great job of being a thing that if you're a fan of the series already, there's like 1,000 things in every episode that you're picking up on that are just these little things that you already know about or are references to things. And then if you have no familiarity with it, it's just very well done. And it's this nice combination of like apocalyptic, but it reminds me of it's actually like Guardians of the Galaxy sort of vibe where it's like they go for, it's not straight epic, like action only stuff. It's trying to kind of like bridge into comedy actually a lot, but oftentimes in situational ways where it's just like that baby foot. They could have shot anything out of that jet, right? But the baby foot is the thing that makes it most absurd. And so it's like, it's that sort of, those choices are just sprinkled throughout the whole thing. So
I think and it has that weird thing because the Fallout games are the same way. It's like you'll be playing, if you play like Fallout, you play like Fallout New Vegas, right? Which is my favorite of the franchise. But you're playing that and you're moving between like stories where you're just like saving some people from a murderer, like you'll have that. And then you'll go into like one of the expansions. You wake up and there's these brains in jars floating around talking to you. And they refer to you as like a meat sack and like have this really weird, like sci-fi, like goofy like as
Pulp
fuck.
Fiction,
pulp, like just weird. Yeah. Just weird as shit. Whole tangent that you go on. And another one where you have basically like ghosts, but like the games are actually
anything could happen.
Anything could happen. Yeah. and that's also what the show did. And it was interesting because like it felt like the people who made the show were having fun with it, and they had like a really big budget. There were a few. There's a handful of like moments in the editing and stuff where I was like, that was a really weird choice. Yeah. There's a moment where what's Dr. Spachemin is? I only remember him as Dr. Spachemin, but whoever the fuck that guy is.
I don't even know who
from SNL.
He's from Saturday Night Live. I can't remember his name either.
I always think of him from 30 Rock. But anyway, so he plays a character later on, and they have this scene where they're sitting down talking, about stuff, and they just had this like weird editing moment where the main character says something, he kind of like reacts to it, but then he like is drinking coffee and he spits it out. And he was like, oh, that one was moldy or something like that. Right. And they come back to her now reacting to the thing that was said now like a few times ago. There's like weird kind of stuff like that where it looks like they had like a piece of footage. They were like, oh, I really want to have this in here though.
Oh, I see.
And so they just decided
to spiced it in there somewhere where it would cause like trouble. But good sight.
But it was just like weird and jarring. And there were a bunch of situations like that throughout the show where it works because of what the show is. I think they can get away with some amount of just like
looseness,
some loosey goosiness.
Yep.
And it all, I loved it. I think it all came together really well. And
it's very good.
Well, And my
They renewed
favorite
for season
line,
2, so I'm pumped about that.
I can't remember this line verbatim, but like one of the characters is talking to this ghoul who, if you know, you'll know what that is if you watch the show. And she's telling him about the golden rule, you know, do unto others as you would have done to you, right? And he's like, no, it's not the golden rule. The golden rule is thou shalt always be sidetracked by random bullshit. And that pretty much goes in line with the games. Because like in the games, you'll always have like one pretty obvious through line main story quest.
I love that moment, actually. It's very funny.
And, you know, you'll get around to it in like 60 hours because there's just random bullshit that you just keep doing. You're like, oh, what's that? Like,
it's all about geographical distance in those games, right? It's like you start essentially on one corner and you kind of usually need to do some weird pathing to get to wherever your main objective is. And it just so happens that it's far away. Like you never show up right next to the thing that you need to do, right? And so you always are in this case where it's like, by the time you've arrived just on foot, the amount of like other random bullshit that you've just sort of been sucked into is so tremendous. Yeah.
Tons of stuff.
It's kind of like in Starfield, they forgot about that. Like they still put your objectives really far away and you still have to walk on foot to get to them for 20 minutes.
Oh,
but they forgot to put random bullshit on the way for you to do.
It is worth mentioning as a PSA, which is that the game studio, Bethesda, they didn't make the show, right? The show's made by people who know how to make shows. But they did.
They also didn't make my favorite Fallout New Vegas.
They didn't make New Vegas either. Yeah.
But they did drop a huge update for Fallout 4, the most recent one. But very importantly, and this feels classic Bethesda to me, it's like huge. It's like 15 gigs or something. Okay. Enormous. Actually fully breaks mods. Okay. So if you're on PC, most people at this point, if you're still playing Fallout 4, you're going to have a lot of mods in there. It'll brick your shit. So don't install that. And it really was actually, it's just for the up-res version. Like it lets you do better graphics, but it doesn't.
Of course.
They fixed like a handful of things, including apparently there's some blocking quests that can happen sometimes, like halfway through. Some guy just like won't say his line. And that's like been known for literally 10 years. They finally fixed it in this. So there's a few fixes in there, but for the most part, it just like, they had no warning that it would break. There was no warning associated with it. Like, hey, this is going to break your shit. Like people found out that it broke their shit because
just by booting up to a non-functioning game.
Yeah. So again, like classic Bethesda on the one hand, you know, and then nicely this new little piece of the IP doing some good work for them, I think, on the other. But I was I'm just, again, disappointing is the only word I can use to describe that nonsense every time. I'm just like,
but there's a certain point because like after Fallout 76, I feel like disappointed is the wrong word because it's just like they just kind of keep living up to the very low bar, you know, where you're like, yeah, that tracks. Like, like anytime they launch something, you're like, oh God, here we go.
Yeah, what?
Anyways, all right. Well, let's get on to some questions. And I'd mentioned last week that we had a pretty good top question, but we didn't have time to get into it because I thought it might take a moment. So
I think we're also already an hour 10 into the last episode when you brought out the question. So.
Yeah. So the highest upvoted question from podcast.bscotch.net comes from Disgruntled Pineapple, who says, "Hey guys, do you think it is generally better to surround yourself with people you agree with, politically, religiously, etc., or is it better to have people in your life you disagree with, people who challenge you to think about what you believe and why you believe it?" Now this has a lot of nuance.
Yeah, there's a lot of nuance here because you shouldn't surround yourself because this is the whole idea of like a bubble being bad, right? Right. But you don't need to surround yourself by people who have bad ideas. That's not a thing. I know people who have ideas really want to make sure they get into everybody else's bubbles so they can have their bad ideas.
I would say it's more about critical thinking skills. Because like if you're surrounding yourself with people who you disagree with, but you and them are exercising a lot of critical thinking rigor and you all understand how and why you got to the conclusions you got to, and the implications of those,
very interesting and very
because it depends on what you're disagreeing on, right? Because if you're coming to it acting in good faith with a few like principles in common, like evidence matters is one principle that like if somebody doesn't believe that evidence is relevant to things, then like I don't have that person
Yeah. Or
around,
compassion matters.
Yeah. And that compassion matters. And that people's like lived actual lives are more important than my opinions about what people's lives should be. Right.
And also the nuance matters. It makes a big difference, right? Because it's like, I think if you get that sort of mixture where essentially what you're talking about there is people who are showing up and disagreeing about stuff in, what I would just think of as a constructive and healthy way, where it's like, because it's like design stuff we talk about a lot, where you can want something not to happen for the same reason someone else wants something to happen, right? Like the consequence that you're seeing is like, oh, I don't like the consequence, can be the exact same reason that someone wants it to happen, right? The consequence is the thing that they think is good. And so, and because it's all about then discovering what exactly is needed in the situation, what is good in the situation, blah, 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 that's where it all gets very interesting, right? And that to me is those cases where you can actually, the whole like agree to disagree thing is accurate, which is like, it's not so much that you're agreeing to disagree so much as you're saying that the thing that I don't like about this, I understand is what makes it valuable to you, in a simple way. And so that's fine because that's more valuable to you and whatever, I can get over it. So,
but it's also, there are places where there isn't a truth that people can
most
end up agreeing upon, right?
Yeah.
But there's also stuff like I don't need to talk to an anti-vaxxer about anti-vax stuff, right? Because or a flat earther, which I would put on the same sort of level of discourse, right?
Yeah, because you're not coming at the question with the same process.
We don't have the same principles. We don't have the same principles, right? And we don't have and those are at least like principle stances. There's ethics involved and morals involved when you come to anti-vaxxers. And so, but we're just not starting from the same model of how the world works. And so I don't like, there's no reason for me to be like, well, they disagree with me, therefore I should talk to them. Right. That doesn't make any sense. Like I also don't need
to, I mean, if that was true, just like go find your nearest Nazi.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I don't need a Nazi to come talk to me either to try to convince me that their worldview is right. And like, I shouldn't, right. That doesn't make any sense. So yeah, I think, but the other interesting thing about this whole, like, staying in your own bubble is bad, whatever, like kind of discourse is that I don't think I've ever heard anybody say anything, no matter how aligned I am with them, where I didn't immediately think, I don't know about that.
Yeah. Which isn't you saying that's not true. It's you saying, I'm not sure if that's true.
Yeah, exactly. Because like, how would somebody know? Because like the way that I go out in the world is just under the operating assumption that most things we don't get to have answers to. Right. And so whenever anybody gives an answer to something, then I'm like, how did you come across this? Like, how did you figure that out? Because that is interesting. And that's if it's an answer that doesn't sound right to me, there's an interesting discussion we can have. And I'm not going to close myself off to that just because it's not what I expected. Right. Mm-hmm. But if the reason they got to that answer is because they hate a certain kind of people, right, then, or because they don't believe in evidence, or that's not accurate. They don't believe that evidence is a good way to figure out how the world works, right? Then no, I don't need to have that.
Yeah. Well, this is where I think it comes down to, like you're saying about principles, right? Which is like, if somebody has a belief set, like something that kind of drives me crazy is when people talk about like, oh, like this person's like super nice and they're a great person. And then you find out that they've got some kind of like deeply misogynistic view or something like that. And my immediate reaction is like, that's not a good person.
Yeah.
And like, I don't care how polite you are. If the consequences of your core beliefs cause active harm to people around you and you literally don't care about that, that's a bad person. Right. So like it's one thing to have people you disagree with, but if people's principles are built around like, yeah, I don't really care if the things that I do actively make everyone's lives worse around me. And actually, I'm all for it. Like that's not just a disagreement about some details. That's like a fundamental disagreement about like morals and what it means to treat people well. So
it's sort of
like in my mind, it's
your consideration of what community or like the values that the person is bringing to the community are kind of, I think, what you guys are getting at here, right? Which is like, does the person care about the health of the community in a way that's good, right? Or is it the sort of thing where their presence is like an actively toxic the situation, right? Because there is no compassion.
Well, the thing is like somebody like that will believe that they are acting in benefit of the community because they've convinced themselves that, for example, like stratifying society where like some people have everything and some people don't is like the way it's supposed to work or something. Like there'll be all kinds of weird mental gymnastics people do to try to get there, you know. But the consequence of it is always that most people lose and you're happy about it. That's kind of the outcome. And so I think for me, it's more like, it's not about agreeing or disagreeing generally. It's about surround yourself with people who are kind, who have the interests of others at heart, and who critically think and analyze their own ideas and try to, you know, improve, right? And like if you surround yourself with people like that, you will disagree with them about most things most of the time because you are thinking about stuff and trying to come to better truths about things. But if you're constantly disagreeing with somebody who's homophobic, you don't need
if you're
to be
disagreeing
around
about human rights, that's like, to me, that's an obvious line. But the other one is like there's so much weird, like both sidesing sort of concept stuff where people are like, well, because another side exists, we have to give it weight, right? And you have to like let it participate in a discussion and so on, right?
No, that side is
there
garbage.
There are things that are just false. It is false that the world is flat. It is false that vaccines don't work or that they are dangerous. It is false that evolution isn't real. It's false that there's no climate change, right? There are things that are just false. And we don't have to let those things to the table. They're like, there's no value that you get out of being like, well, I'm going to let this anti-vaxxer like try to convince me about their anti-vax nonsense, right? Like,
well, and recognizing
you don't
that,
have to do that, and there's no value in doing that. And that's not like an amazing thing that you're doing as like an open-minded person. That's you entertaining clearly false things to be nice, I guess. I'm not really sure like what.
Well, but yeah, and I think the problem is like it's definitely
to do that.
It feels like you should engage with that to try to correct it sometimes. But the thing is, this person somehow landed there despite having access to all the information in the world, right? Like the internet exists, and if somebody ends up with one of these viewpoints, like being an anti-vaxxer or whatever, right? Nothing you say ever is going to get them off of that.
Yeah, and that's good
right?
because you disagree on how to reason,
how to think,
right? Yeah.
I think there's an interesting point here in the psych data, which is that there's a technique called motivational interviewing that actually works for talking people through these like typically like something like an anti-vax stance into something where they are, you know, deciding to vaccinate their kids and stuff like that. And I think the problem is that it is genuinely a technique that requires a lot of practice to be able to do at all effectively or efficiently as a person, right? And
but even at its best, it's still really inefficient.
It's inefficient. Yeah, it's a one-to-one thing. This is not the
you have to really know the person, and they have to be willing to like engage with you.
It's about listening,
right?
At the end of the day, right? It's about essentially being able to sit there and listen to someone talking about stuff and just ask them questions, right? That's literally it, right? You sort of are helping them guide their way.
This is why this makes me so mad, though, is because there's so many bad ideas out there that are either morally repugnant or just factually incorrect, often both, you know. Mm-hmm. And somehow then I have to spend my time like thinking about those clearly wrong things and like talking to people, you know, about.
You got to do their thinking for them.
Yeah. And there's the problem is there's no end of it. There's no end of like bad, wrong things that can.
Well, it's a scale thing. Right? It's like it's the bad ideas can be picked up at scale. But undoing, like basically correcting those things really effectively. But
also, I would rather talk to somebody. I'd rather argue with somebody about good ideas. You know, like
I don't think it's your job. I think it's
I don't even think you're saying that we should. I'm saying like the reason that I hate the whole idea of like, well, you should no matter how the person disagrees with you fundamentally about something, therefore you should communicate with them about it, right? Like that idea. That's the reason I hate it so much, is because it's a huge fucking waste of what otherwise could have been actually useful time spent of like somebody talking to somebody else who has interesting things to talk about.
Yeah, my hot take on it with regards to the question, which is should you surround yourself with people that are like-minded, is that the reality is that because of your existing in a world with complexity to it, where you don't get to make all the choices about everybody who's around you all the time, I do think it's fine to surround yourself with people, not who agree with you, but again, who maybe agree on the approach with you. I think that's the the bit of nuance for me. But I think it's actually very important to cultivate a crew where that is, you have an agreed upon approach, and it, follows something like these principles that you guys are talking about. Because the reality is that you have a lot of interfacing that you don't get to choose with other people who oftentimes have absolutely wild ideas or absolutely wild approaches to how they get those ideas or even how to discuss them. And so you're guaranteed to have that, if that makes sense. Like maybe it's an in-law, it's a cousin who hits you up with some crazy shit. It's your coworker who sits next to you. It's your boss, like people you don't get to choose, right? So I think choosing a group who has a similar approach to you is kind of oftentimes the only way that you can have a group that has a similar approach to you, close at hand. I don't know how else you do it, because otherwise it's just kind of random, right?
Well, I think but it's also about like at what level you engage, right? Because just because you have a shitty in-law, right, who's has terrible opinions about stuff, that doesn't mean you actually.
Yeah, you don't have to talk to them.
You're not required by some kind of like higher framework, right, that you have to engage them on that topic as if their insane opinions have equal weight to reality, right? Like that doesn't have to be how you meet that stuff. And I would actually, to me, like this isn't about surrounding yourself with like or unlike-minded people, I guess. It's just about, are you starting from a place where you actually have good foundational principles? Because if the answer to this is like, oh, find people like you, but you have terrible principles, I don't think that's good to just have terrible principles and surround yourself with other people's terrible principles, right? So I think it's more, I think the question is the wrong question, which is like and it's actually much more complicated, which is how do you know if you have bad principles? And then how do you, because if you cannot expose yourself to ideas that are fundamentally different from yours to test your principles, right, then it's harder to know if they're invalid or not.
But also, how do you know?
But again, given like some things are just fundamentally wrong or evil, then exposing yourself to those doesn't actually give you any benefit because you're already not in that camp, but everybody thinks they're already in that camp, right? And so that's where
that's what I was going to get at, which is it's also challenging though to fully. I mean, essentially what you learn from looking at stuff like that motivational interviewing thing is that the second people don't feel heard, they don't have an open mind about doing anything that you are talking about. So fully coming at someone with, demonizing energy about whatever belief they hold or whatever else is just also, that's also never going to work. So if you...
Well, it depends. Yeah, well, because it depends on your goal. It just doesn't. If you're trying to... No, but when you say it doesn't work to do what? And you're saying work to convince somebody that they're wrong, which is not... necessarily
or
the
work
goal
to have a conversation.
Which is not necessarily the goal of any given social interaction, right? Because part of it might be you're just trying to get out of there as soon as you can once you've identified a disaster in front of you, right? So it might just be survival. There's a lot of reasons you might have the interaction, but none of the interactions have to be. It is now my duty to listen to what this person has to say,
100%.
Even though it's heinous and despicable, right? Or just stupid and wrong. You don't have to listen to that just because it's not your opinion, right?
Yeah, well, this is where like a lot of the nuance comes in because because earlier when I said you're not going to convince somebody like if they've had a whole lifetime of processing information. And then you just come in and you're like, let me point out to you some reasons why your position doesn't make sense, right? Like Sam was saying, there are ways to convince people, and I fully acknowledge that. But I think that the challenge here is it's really time consuming, really expensive, only works some of the time. You got to be really careful about it. And you're only able to really hit like one viewpoint at a time. And oftentimes if somebody holds a particular harmful belief or just wildly, incorrect one about how the world works or something, that's not the only one they've got because
they always come together. Well,
their method of approaching thinking through how things work and stuff is flawed enough that that person is just really susceptible to just accumulating fucked up ideas, right?
This is why all conspiracies lead to all the other conspiracies, right?
Yeah. And so you can like sometimes dislodge one of those bad ideas by talking somebody through it. But the next time you see that person, they may actually land right back where they started. Or, they'll still have all these other weird things going on. And it's kind of like, it's like the cliff versus the ocean, like at some point, like the ocean just wins. Like it just never stops kind of battering the rocks and just wearing it down. Because that person is working with like a different fundamental way of thinking or not thinking, as the case may be, that you're not going to change how that person's brain works on a fundamental level like that. You know what I mean? Like I remember, so when I was in college, we did this thing called Grab a Brew, Share Your View. I was with a non-religious student group, and kind of like to get at this question, it was like we're in a bubble here. Because we were on a very religious campus, and there were, I think, like several hundred different, mostly Christian student organizations and one non-religious one. And as we were like going out on campus trying to make people aware of our group so that non-religious people would like be able to, find people that are like-minded and hang out with, our posters kept getting ripped down, and people were really upset about the fact that we didn't believe in something. And so we were like, we should open some dialogues with religious groups. So we started this event, Grab a Brew, Share Your View. And it was basically, we invited various like churches and religious student groups to come, and it's like an open mic night. And we would just have a question, sometimes not even a religious one, like, is recycling good? Just a question about like something going on in the world. And then different people from either group just would get their own shot, like 30 seconds on the mic, get up there, share your thoughts on it. And then anybody could come up and share their own thoughts or respond to something somebody else said. And it was pretty interesting. But something that we noticed over time as we did this for, 6 months or whatever, is that very often somebody would come up, share an idea that was just wrong, they'd be like, oh yeah, well, like, we all know that like evolution isn't real because the earth is 6,000 years old or whatever. And somebody would come up and they would refute something about that claim, and they would point to reasons why that is wrong and all the different ways that we know that that's wrong. And also, in some cases, even like indicate extra resources that person could go to learn more about all that stuff, all the scientific evidence and everything. And then a couple weeks later, we'd have the event again, and that same person would come up and just say the exact same thing. And this would happen week after week. And no matter how many times and how many angles people would refute what the person was saying, they would just verbatim come back with the exact same.
But I think what's interesting about this is like it's sort of exactly what I would expect, regardless of what of the content. If that makes sense. Yeah, you could be talking about this is kind of coffee, right? But it's like that particular forum is just not a place. If I go up on a mic and share an idea, that is not the place where I'm going to be in any way open for changing what that idea is after the fact when other people refute it, right? As like
that was the first part of the event. Mm-hmm. So it was always 30 minutes of open mic and then about an hour of just chatting, right? Mm-hmm. And so people would then
sort of set the theme and put some initial ideas out there.
So people would then talk at length about the stuff that had come up during the open mic with other people who they agree or disagree with. And that still didn't do it. So what we found out later was that when we had started this event, several different religious groups saw this event and they were like, oh, we're going to convert these people.
Yeah.
And so they came into it only with the agenda of just sort of like throwing a bunch of talking points out at us, trying to convert us. And so they were not there to have conversations or listen or learn. They only wanted to just keep hammering us with the same points over and over again. And that was really all they knew how to do. Like when we would counter with like actual evidence and studies and whatever else, that would just go right in the garbage. Like that wasn't what they were there for. So there's also like a lot of these motivational things that come into play because in their worldview it was like that was something that they had to do to like help themselves get into heaven or like whatever the case may be. And so there's all these like weird layers in like, how do you convince someone of something? And there's so many things that have to line up in a confluence for that person to be in a spot where they can even get the new information in, So it's entirely possible to convince somebody of something that counters their current worldview. But man, the planets and stars really have to align.
Yeah,
to make that.
It's a tricky one. It's a very tricky one.
Yeah, and in my younger days, like that was actually an important thing to me. Of like, I didn't like it that people could just be wrong.
How are these people just walking around just being wrong?
Being wrong,
It makes no sense.
Because like, well, it's one of those things. It's like I just don't like it when a thing is wrong, right? Like, which is different than wanting to be right, right? So like, I'm indifferent to like being the person who's correct. That's not a thing that I seek, right? What I don't like is when things are just obviously wrong, right? That just
I'll also say you don't want to be wrong. Like you're okay with not being right because you know that's a nearly impossible thing to hit.
Yeah,
but actually, I'm
okay
wrong.
with being wrong in the sense that like if I'm wrong about something, I want to know that because that's why I don't like being wrong.
Yeah, you're on a journey of always trying to be slightly less wrong about something than you were before.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah. And so it used to be something that I thought was important to be like, oh, if I see something that's just wrong, to be like, oh, hey, by the way, that's wrong, and here's why, right?
I mean, like, work's done. Moving on. The process
is over time, and of course, it wasn't like not literally that simple, right? But like, as in, like, here's an opportunity for a dialogue. I should try to figure out like why this person like. But it's the same. Like what I learned over time, though, is that the reasons are always the same for why people are wrong about something, right? And when someone's invested in whatever their incorrect stance is, then they always have to defend it, right? But they're always wrong in the same way that all the other people who have that idea are wrong. And the way that they defend it is by having a shared collection of the arguments, right? Of like why. At this point in my life, there's not an argument I have not seen for anti-vaxxers, for evangelical Christianity, for evolution, for climate denialism.
Yep.
There are no new for flat earthers, right? There's no new argument in these spaces, and all of them, every argument is stretch, but easily debunked, right? And that's been true since these ideas came into being, which is a long time. So now in my a little bit older years, when I confront somebody who's like got one of these weird beliefs, then I know that they're really invested in that belief. Whether it's something just factually wrong or some immoral belief that they have, either way. Because the only way they could still hold that belief is if they are extremely invested in it. And so at this point now, I'm just like,
there's an ego thing.
I see what this is. Goodbye is now my strategy rather than trying to.
Because somebody has landed in a spot where it is extremely important to them for something to be true because they've anchored something fundamental about their sense of self into that belief, and moving away from that belief means, I think like a really interesting example is hunters. Hunters will always talk about conservation, right? Like to them, oftentimes they're like, I love nature. I love getting out in nature. I hunt because it's important for population control, blah, blah, blah. How many hunters do you know who are against factory farming and who drive electric vehicles? and who like only eat meat that they've hunted because otherwise, the carbon emissions are bad for the planet, or all these different things, right? And it's like sometimes like people will convince themselves that they hold a position, or that they've kind of like anchored their personality into something that seems like really positive to them, even if it conflicts with a bunch of other things that they're doing. And if you challenge something about what they're doing and like point out that it kind of conflicts with, like there's like a cognitive dissonance thing, then there's a doubling down that happens, or they'll just kind of detach and move away from the conversation, So like there's a lot of psychological defense mechanisms that just kick in immediately, like a puffer fish. They're just
I think the trickiest part actually as you get older, at least for me, is remaining open, weirdly enough. And again, not to the ideas that you already know are very dumb, right? So not to like the anti-vax stuff, but just like,
but to things that challenge what you believe.
It's because again, it's also, to me, it's the thing I don't like oftentimes about how discourse in this space goes is that I think it's easy in the same way that most conspiracy theories lead to all the rest of the conspiracy theories. It's also, to me, easy to start spreading your kind of like, this idea is dumb. I've heard these ideas too much. And then like it kind of starts spreading. So you close your own approach.
Yeah. Like this thing you're saying sounds somewhat like this other thing that I definitely think is dumb. So I'm just not even going to start.
I'm not even listening. At all.
But again, it's all about your ability to critically analyze things.
Oh, it is.
Because that's part of it. Because I agree that's part of the problem is that people actually don't know how to differentiate two things that are similar but not the same.
Yeah, or you know, if let's say you and I start talking about something, and I'm very, very much convinced that I'm not talking about something that fits one of these categories, but you're convinced the opposite, right? That is like you think it's going to be a thing that you don't even want to engage with because it's completely bonkers. But I'm actually talking about something else, but it would require a bit of, you know, back and forth to establish what the fuck I'm saying, right? Those are the things where I think that's sort of one of my fears along this dimension, which is that it's...
Well, I think it depends on the relationship, right? Because because to me, it stems 100%. First from like, what is the relationship for and what is the goal of the interaction, right? And if the relationship is actually, if I have a friend relationship, family relationship, whatever, with somebody and they start saying weird stuff, right? Then I have an investment of like figuring out, okay, like why is this
person back on
what's
track.
happening? Like, yeah. And given that the reason we would have been like friends in the first place would have been because we thought we had shared
some
ideals and morals and ways of thinking about how the world works, right? That if something seems like it's going off the rails there, I'm going to come to that always in good faith first, under the assumption that like, oh, there must be something I don't know about here, right? And so all of this comes to the question first is just why? Like why? Mm-hmm. What do you mean, right? What do you mean? And like, how did you get there? Like, I want to know that first before I get into the whole, right? Yeah. And yeah, I think that's where the nuance is figuring out like, I think people have this weird idea that like, if you're on social media, right, then you just have to like, if someone was to come into your replies and demand that they argue with you about long debunked bullshit or whatever, that you just have to listen to that, right? Which is a very different kind of thing. And in that case, like if somebody comes into you kind of like with a questionable thing, again, you don't have a relationship with that person. Who gives a shit? Leave it alone, right? But if you're trying to figure out how to like negotiate stuff, if like people you don't want a relationship with but have to have one because of work or whatever, right? Or because of extended family or whatever your situation is. But that still doesn't look the same as like a close friend or close family member, spouse, whatever, right? And so the degree to which it makes any sense to like try to actually understand where a person is coming from depends on the purpose of the relationship and the nuances of like, have you actually seen that thing before? And is it definitely immoral / incorrect, right?
Also,
or is it shaped like one of those things and you have a reasonable but incorrect sort of allergic reaction to it?
Right. Because I guess there's a good opposite there too, which is just as when people reach out to you on like the internet and say real whack shit, you don't have to spend any energy. You could just block them and move on. You don't have to worry about it.
Yeah, there's a mute or a block option.
Yeah, similarly, you don't have to correct everybody who just is publicly saying stuff on the internet, nor participate. You don't have to like...
Yeah, I just block those too. Because like...
Yeah,
what you don't understand is engagement drives visibility.
Yep.
So if somebody says something just totally off the rails, and you jump in and start replying and like just start piling into a comment thread about it,
you're boosting it.
You're boosting that thing, and not only that, but you're adding more fuel to this fire that other people will come in and start arguing with you or backing you up. Mm-hmm. And in both cases, you are elevating the visibility of this. Like this is like the whole like the thing about how everything fucking Donald Trump does is in the news.
Yeah.
No matter what it is, right? Because it's entertaining and all the speculation about it and all the lies and everything else. And it's like if the news networks back in 2016 were just like, man, this guy's an idiot, let's just not cover him.
Yep.
He wouldn't have been president. That would but because there was this kind of spectacle to it of seeing somebody who's just such a dick and is just so wrong about just like every single thing,
And it begets further spectacles, right? As people then argue and say their own crazy shit and whatever else. And so it's like,
well, and then they're looking at the spectacle that they've created, and they're like, and it's a meta level spectacle, right?
Yep.
Where it's like, can you believe half the country got behind this clearly
and then you've got
idiotic, insane person? You know,
it just keeps going.
And it keeps going.
And you got like news networks talking about stuff that other news networks talked about the thing. You know, it's just like the Twitter thread problem, right? And it's like, you have to recognize that these things are ideas are fueled by how much people engage with them, not just on social media, but just in general.
But there is nuance there too, right? Because if you don't know what the ideas are that are out there, then you can't necessarily keep yourself safe, because some of those ideas can be really dangerous to the subsets of people that they're about, right? And so some people have to engage to some extent to try to provide some kind of a counter narrative to the particularly bad stuff. But there's a lot of nuance and complexity about how you go about that too when you have to. And I think the core of it, though, is the idea that like no given person has to be doing this, right? And if you do decide to, then you just have to understand like what it is that you are trying to accomplish and like what it means to be interacting with people along that dimension of like trying to convince, right?
Yeah,
and it doesn't.
I have a hard time believing that anybody who's tweeted some random hurtful bullshit at any point in time, if you're participating in that stuff in order to provide a counter narrative, the challenge I think is in not accidentally signal boosting the other stuff because of how this algorithms work, right?
Well, that's all part of the nuance. But I think there though the counter signal is not actually to try to convince, because again, like if you're
it's about showing other people that there is a counter.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah. But I think
and the same with us talking about like having your minority group on campus, right? And you're like, to make sure that other non-theists like know that this group exists so that they have a place they can go. Mm-hmm. Right. It's the same idea there. Is like the goal of that isn't to convince religious people that like they shouldn't be religious. That's not at all the goal, right? The goal is to
just saying,
say,
hey,
like,
we're here too.
Yeah, we're here too, and that's a normal thing. And we will never convince you in a million years that is normal. But we can at least collect everybody else together so that everybody gets the solidarity of being like, okay, we have our group that we can try to again provide in the long term counter narratives that might eventually get actually soaked up by the people on the other side, right? But that isn't the goal, though. The goal is first to basically just display like, hey, this is actually fine.
It's fine. And these people are just hanging out. There's nothing weird going on. Like we would just have brunch on Sundays.
You mean Satan brunch?
They're not theists, Adam.
My understanding from people who don't think about this very much is that their understanding of non-theism is that you worship the devil.
To be fair, there was a lot of, probably a lot of like cherry syrup or something like that spilled on those pancakes on those Sundays, I imagine.
Yeah, very blood.
Yeah, we can't use real blood. I mean, that's just too expensive. But I think that also just kind of like to kind of wrap it up like that. I think that also kind of speaks to just how hard it is to imagine how somebody else is thinking.
Yes,
because something that would always come up with the discussions between like our non-religious group and religious groups is like us just like not being able to fathom how somebody could possibly land there in like think and like believing that these things are true, right? And no matter how you talk through it, it's like, all right, so like talking snake and like a fruit of knowledge and like a person being made out of a rib and like just stuff that no matter what angle you come at it from is like
it's too fantastic.
It's magic. It's just made up stories, right? And also like looking like from a non-religious perspective, looking at each different religious group or like ancient religions and things like that, and they all just kind of seem the same. Like they're all just kind of making stuff up, right? But then coming from a religious perspective, that like that's how you've seen the world from day one. Like you were taught about like all these things and never really came into your mind to question it. And then somebody coming in saying like, yeah, I don't believe in that. And the idea of there just being no belief there, like where you have this deep well of faith, right? And for somebody else to just have nothing there at all, right? Like it just doesn't make sense to you.
It's weird.
Like they have to believe something, right? Like
that is what people say, right?
it's weird and similar in some ways. Like, like Adam has aphantasia. Like he can't see things in his mind's eye, right?
Yeah, but he only knows that that's atypical because other people have talked about what's going on in their minds.
Yeah, but neither of us can imagine what that's like.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah.
And so like the weirdest thing is like after hearing about that, then of course the first thing that happens is that usually both parties in the case of like an aphantasia start asking each other a lot of questions like, wait, do you mean that what is this? Is it like this did for you? Is it like this? Is it like that? Right. And so it's like,
and then you start asking things like, is it actually that everybody has aphantasia, it's just that some people don't know it because they're really good at tricking themselves into thinking that they see
you'll
things,
never know the answer.
Vice versa. Yeah. And that's where you start getting that thing of like, are we actually having a fundamentally different first level experience? Or are we having a different experience of the experience, right? Which, like I said, there's no way to know the difference.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because you'll have people who that's the debate they get into. It's basically one where they actually don't believe there's a real difference and that it's being made up. Right, which is also like an argument you see for like any kind of human diversity. People just being like, "I've decided that's not real. You're just making it up." Right, and like it's that classic like first level when you can't grok because it's something so fundamentally different from how you see yourself in the world. Right, that you can't grok at all that somebody else has. Not something just different, but like missing or the opposite.
Well, it's easy to then like kind of spin that as like that person being deceptive because if you're like bullshit,
because you can't touch it. If the whole point is evidence, right? You can't. I cannot experience Adam's aphantasia. So what does that leave me with?
Exactly.
Trust, that's it.
Which is why like the idea of like Satan worship often gets applied to non-religious people, right? Because it's like bullshit. Everybody believes something, and you're just ashamed of what you believe in. So obviously, you're just not telling anybody. So you're worshiping something evil, right? Like I've had these conversations before where if somebody just can't imagine that somebody else could have such a fundamentally different worldview than them, then it has to be a lie.
Yeah. So you transplant, or just that the person isn't articulating it correctly, right? So you basically transplant something that still meshes with your belief system onto that person. And it's going to be usually unflattering or,
almost
outright
always
bad.
Yeah. And like this is kind of where like a lot of that stuff comes from of like one group believing that another group of people is purposely doing evil things when really they're just minding their own fucking business and they're just living life in a little bit of a different way. There's nothing purposeful or deceptive about it. It's just you're just not looking at things the same way, and it's fine. So anyways, I guess to kind of get back around to wrap up the question. You should have people around you who disagree with you, but good people with ethics and critical thinking skills.
Yeah, who disagree on stuff, not who aren't disagreeing in that they just are espousing factually incorrect things, but are disagreeing because you and that person are looking at some part of the world for which there cannot be an answer and are trying to work together to figure out like, okay, how do we move forward with like what we think is a reasonable answer for this question, given that there isn't just an answer.
Yeah, you should both be aligned on the
things
the
that are
goal of
true.
both trying to be less wrong.
Yeah.
And if you do that, like you'll always be disagreeing with everybody around you, but in a positive way.
Yeah.
Where together you are both moving toward a better truth. So hope that answers the question because that's all the time we have. I would like to thank our producers Fat Bard and Sampa Costa for putting the podcast together, and thanks to our community moderators who keep our Discord running. To get more involved in the Butterscotch community, just go to podcast.bscotch.net, where we have links to the community Discord, a way for you to donate, and links to the podcast archives. And as always, if you haven't yet, head on over to Steam and give Crashlands 2 a wish list. And of course, the demo will be out May 21st, and that'll be out for at least a month or so. So head on over there, give us a wish list, check out the demo when it comes out, and then all that stuff will really help boost the game for launch. We appreciate it. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Bye.